Okay. Are we ready, Marcel?
Yep, everything's on the go.
Okay. Welcome everyone to our global read. This is the one for May. We actually have two this month. You missed the first one, which was incredible, Sand Talk, and you can go to the Charter website and listen to it. It's a real presentation around the whole concept of dreaming and exchange of dreams and memories among the Aboriginal people of Australia. I think you'll find it really interesting. And definitely you're going to find today's presentation interesting as well. I'm Marilyn Turkovich, and I'm the Executive Director of the Charter for Compassion. And I have been fortunate enough to be involved with today's global read. I was asked to do the foreword, and it was really quite an honor to do that. One of the things that I wanted to share with you today is to thank you first for everyone who makes these global reads possible. We select 12 books a year. We're just about to make the announcement of our books for 2022. This is a great opportunity for our members and people outside the Charter to come and hear from the authors themselves and to have an opportunity to interact with them. One thing I wanted to let you know is that at the bottom of your screen, there's both a chat box and a question and answer box. And we'll be monitoring those just to see if you have questions as we go along the way. The other thing that we'd like to do is to ask you anytime during this presentation today, if you think you'd like to be a part of a continued conversation in education, just let us know. Put your name and your email address in the chat box, and we will get back to you very soon. Because one of the things that we have in the Charter are 12 sectors, and these are the kinds of sectors that you find in society. Education is one of them. And we really are taking a very serious look at the kinds of ways that we can interact with communities around the world. And when I say around the world, we have membership from about 197 countries. And it's always wonderful to come on to a Zoom call or a webinar to meet up with people from other places in the world. So that's part of the introduction. And as many of you know, Education for Survival is the work of a number of people, but it comes, I think, from the incredible idea of Maurice Infant Coles. And then the book itself was edited with Bill Gent. And so we are really fortunate to have these words, this book. I kind of look at it as a small and mighty book. My whole life has been dedicated to education. I think that Maurice sensed that. I was an elementary school teacher, high school principal, curriculum coordinator, and then for many years directed a teacher training program. And all of that was in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. And so I had an opportunity to experience education from all levels. And I think this book really reflects education from all levels. But what it does do is it offers us, as good Adlerian psychologists would say, a teleological view, something that is out there in the future that we need to grab hold of. Because the pandemic has taught us a lot about education. But I think the biggest thing that happened during the pandemic for me was the fact that both of these editors of this book died of COVID. And I can't tell you how moved I was and still am when I heard the news. And so if we could just take 2 minutes to focus on, I know maybe many of you don't know the lives of these two men, but on the contribution that they really have made. So we'll just take a moment or two of silence. Thank you. I asked if I could have some photographs of both Maurice and of Bill, and Rohisha, who you'll meet in a minute, sent these on. And these 3 photographs of Maurice are really quite, I think, show exactly who he was, a man of curiosity, reflection, intention, and joy. And I was sharing with the group who you'll be hearing from, I met Maurice in 2014 at the Compassion Week program that we sponsored with Stanford University CCARE in 2014. And then he just seemed to pop up almost everywhere that I was going. Maurice was there. And the conversations were joyful, but they were always very intense. And here's a wonderful picture of Bill. So I'm going to turn this over to Amajit Butcher and to Rohisha Coles. And I think first we're going to start with Amajit, who worked very closely with Maurice. And before we started, we were sharing some stories, but I'll let it be in her hands. And I do have the first 2 slides that you asked for, Amajit. So would you like me to switch to one first, or would you like to speak first?
Yes, please, if you could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I've got the book here. I keep it with me all the time. Actually, I love to flick through it. But it going through the book with Maurice was a massive learning experience for me, and I feel like he always said it was like one of the hardest things he ever did. He drew from so many experts in his field. He pulled it all together into this book for it really was education for survival. He started off with a slightly smaller question of how do we reinvent the curriculum, how do we make that better for our children, and ended up pulling on this thread that led him to the fact that this planet is in peril, and how do we go about sorting out that big issue with our young, really. And so it was a real labor of love, I can honestly say that. I mean, and he'll say that in his TED talk as well. He went through all sorts of emotions, and I did too. And we went through all that sort of 7 signs of grief as well, because we started to look at what was going on the planet, and thinking, gosh, there's got to be more out there that's got to help. And Morrissey came up with this idea of the crest, which is what you can see on your screen at the moment. We can sort out all of the planetary issues if we were to be more compassionate. If we were, we sort of disagreed on the next one, in that actually religion, he was very religious. I'm more spiritual, I would say, than religious. So we had some good debates on that. And actually, he then changed it to religion and spirituality. Economics, we've got the answers there. This idea of trickle-down economy does not work. We've got to reinvent that wheel. We've got the sciences behind us. We've got old science, new science, and it's all coming together, and it's all saying the same thing, that the planet is in peril. We need to do something about it, and let's use the technology that we've got. In his TED talk, he talks about old technology being trees. It's there. We can sort this problem out, but there is new technology out there as well. if anyone has seen his TED talk, it sort of goes through all of the thinking behind the book, and all of the threads that he pulled upon to get into this. But the next slide, if you don't mind, then talks about what the Co-Ed Foundation meant to Maurice, and how that whole idea slots into the pyramid. That compassion, once you start down the route of compassion, you start with yourself as the foundation. Naturally, you become more compassionate with others, your family, people around you. That naturally then goes up into place and community, and before you know, you're compassionate about the planet as well. And the three threads that it links to, you know, if you're compassionate and you pull that out from your soul, you can then link to the sacred, and of course the science is always there to support it. And the lovely thing about that pyramid then, and I remember him, he told me he got up at 3 in the morning and he had this idea of a pyramid. He says, Amma, you need to make this pyramid for me. So we then sculpted this pyramid, and it was fantastic, because actually what he then did was use that pyramid to then base the chapters in the book, where these chapters from all these wonderful authors who are their experts in their field, how does that fit into this pyramid, and how does that then culminate in, you know, the answer to saving the planet, really. Yeah, and it was a wonderful journey to take with him.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to, no, we're not going to go to Mike. We're going to go right to Rahisha. And maybe you can pick it up from there. I can stop sharing the screen for a moment and you can just start.
Thank you, Marilyn. I was just gonna, I think, talk a little bit about Dad and how we kind of came into the charity, really. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much for having us all here today and having the book as part of kind of the global read. So thank you. It's a huge honour. I think I speak for all of us in that, and I think Dad would be hugely privileged to be here. I think for those of you that didn't meet Dad, he was, I think those 3 pictures, Marilyn, were just a huge reflection of him. He was a teacher through and through. He was born and bred in London and was the first of his family to go to university, and wanted to become a teacher, and kind of taught in many different schools, kind of advocating for young people who had a range of difficulties, advocating for families. And I think all the way through his life, he had seen what compassion looked like, but also wanted to show how to role model it. So I think it was a kind of intrinsic personality that he had, but he wanted to show how others could do it. And I think whilst he was kind of teaching, he realised actually the world was a lot bigger than just where he was at in London. And so he went and travelled. He went to kind of 12 different countries and came back. And then from everything that he had seen, he had heard, he had learned, he then kind of shared that with everybody else. And everybody that Dad met, he would listen, and he would take something from each of that person, but he would also give something to them. And I think we were talking earlier about kind of humour. He was very funny, he was very quick-witted, but he would always leave you with questions. He would always leave you with something about kind of how to make things better, whether that was kind of within yourself, whether that was kind of with others, or whether that was around kind of a wider system. And I think one of the things in terms of his journey through kind of his career, he kind of had worked for bigger organisations, doing kind of inspectors, working within the inspectorate, and then had gone to do kind of he worked for something called the SDSA, working for a council, and looked at kind of how to change things. And he was all about change. So if he saw things weren't okay, he was like, how do we make a difference? But how do we do that well? And he wanted to work not only with young people and listen and advocate for them, but he wanted to work with teachers and professionals. And after he retired, he couldn't stop there. And that was kind of how the charity came about. So he continued that ethos, and compassion for him was just at his core, and that never changed. So the essence of Dad was compassion. And so I think this book was kind of bringing all of his life, all of his work, everybody that he had met, was trying to bring it into, well, if you can bring it into one book. It was the start, but it was also the practicals of, well, how do you do that? What can we do, and what kind of practical tips can we offer, so that the kind of the next steps for the next generation, and I do think the grandchildren, and you will have seen the five with him there, how do we make things better for them? How do we teach them about self-compassion? How do we teach them to kind of look after one another, and how do we teach them to look after the planet? And so actually that drive was even more so because he was aware that he wasn't going to be around in the future, and I think the book was just that sort of that compelling moment for him of, I want to do something differently. And so yeah, that was what he'd done, and he completed it before he sadly left us. And yeah, he would be very proud of kind of where it's at now.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear from you later because you are a contributor to the book, and I didn't introduce Rohisha properly. She is an occupational therapist in child and adolescent mental health, and she specializes in intervention and prevention work for young people, and that's what her chapter deals with. But we are going to now delve into the book and to a few of the chapters because there were a number of contributors. And Mike is the first one that we have up. And it's really wonderful because you have really experienced the whole spectrum of education. And, you know, one of the things that's so exciting is that you have not only done it within a school and a local level, but you've done it in a national level. And your chapter is called Towards a Compassionate School System. So we're open. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. It's a delight to join the session as well for me. Our book looked at various aspects of the way in which compassion needs to run through society, and the way in which we need to influence our young people to bring about a more compassionate world. And of course, where that can begin is in the home and with the family and community, but it can also begin in the school. And if we're talking about an education for survival, then we need to talk about the way the schooling system can enable survival. So Maurice asked me to write a chapter about the school system. And wherever we are in the world, in whatever school, we seek to give children a better future. And all school systems, whether they're private or public, seem to use the same 5 levers to do that. First of all, they build a curriculum, and usually they say it's a curriculum for the future. And then they start to put things around that curriculum to make it work. And so they want better, well-trained, highly qualified, highly skilled teachers. They look for effective leadership that will carry those teachers forward towards that better curriculum. They sometimes put in place tests and examinations that help children to show what they can do and develop the qualification that they've got to meet the challenges of the world ahead. And usually school systems bring in an accountability regime and an inspection regime that tries to check that the schools are meeting the standards that we expect. And it's those 5 levers that I explore in my chapter. If we want a really good curriculum, then it's important that everybody understands what it is that's going to make a difference in the future. How do we look at the challenges of global sustainability, climate change threats, and how do we address them? But equally, how do we look at the fact that people are moving across the globe in greater numbers than ever before and are seeking the sort of life they want for themselves, their families, and their communities? How do we balance the need to look after the natural world with the increasing importance of the technological world? And a curriculum that does that is one that whispers to children about how the future might be and asks children to contribute to the conversation themselves. And as systems try to develop their teachers to make that curriculum come alive, it's important that they help the teachers to be growing people, that they build on research, that they collaborate with each other in school, but across the planet, to make teaching a profession that can make the difference. And that means leadership that's fascinated with pedagogy that helps children to learn, that has big standards for itself, but it's actually inspirational leadership that helps teachers and children see the future in a really positive way. And any tests that we put in, any examinations need to be, I believe, very limited and only testing what's needed. And they need to be learning focused and economic in the sense of easy to do and tests that are available when you need them and that you challenge yourself with rather than have imposed upon you. Because what my chapter points out is that many systems in the world are burdened by accountability that stop being proportionate. If accountability is the fifth lever that organisations use, it started to become disproportionate in many places across the world. What we should be doing is using a personal responsibility to move things on, where we want to learn from the best and be the best we can be. And what we need is, if we're using inspection, is a trusted and consistent system that we all believe in and welcome into our midst to help us to get better and improve our prospects for young children. But in the recent past, I point out in my chapter, especially in the UK, but in many countries around the globe, there's been an overemphasis on accountability, which has led to a disproportionate move away from a compassionate outlook. The growing influence of OECD and PISA testing and countries and systems measuring each other against one another has seen a competitive rather than a compassionate outlook to the purpose of education. And schooling across the globe has seen nations imposing centralised and managerial approaches rather than compassionate and thoughtful approaches to the benefit of children. And my chapter tries to explore that, and then it does try to offer hope. It gives some examples from different nations across the world, and particularly one in the UK, the nation that's called Wales, where there has been a terrific emphasis on helping young people to learn about the future because education is focused on the future. So they talk about a globally responsible Wales, a resilient Wales, a more equal Wales, a healthier Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities where vibrant culture and language really matter, a prosperous Wales in the sense of economic prosperity, but in the prosperity of people as people and communities supporting each other. But my chapter ends where I think all good education ends, in classrooms with children. And I reflect that across the globe, there are children who are stimulated, motivated, engaged, autonomous, challenged, excited, responsible for their own learning. And at the same time, there are, sadly, children who are bored and mystified, compliant, disengaged, sometimes negative and disruptive, and wanting not to be in school. And what we want is more of the former and less of the latter. We want stimulated, engaged, responsible, challenged, excited children. And that comes about by teachers really believing they affect the heart and the mind, where teachers know that children learn best by experiment, by solving things, by wondering, by being able to explain, so that they can discuss, think, discern, empathise, criticise, and really work out where their world needs to go and how they can influence it going forward. And that means, if we want teachers like that we've got to have leadership and systems that are compassionate in themselves, that inspire people to do the best they can for children and the best they can for society and the globe, where they think they can make a difference, where they care about themselves, where they care about each other, and where they care about the future. And my chapter points the way to the other chapters in the book, which go into yet more detail about the difference schooling can make and the difference the systems can make if they just grasp the idea of compassion and take it forward. It was a pleasure to be part of it, and the book itself is one that I think we should try to get everybody in education across the world to read. Thanks for listening to me, and thanks for arranging this opportunity.
You know, Mike, it's really wonderful what you say about the book. And I love your chapter because it is an introduction to survival. The other thing I think that you mentioned, and I'm quite certain that if people would pick up the book, it is almost like a readable dictionary. I mean, it has, you know, such incredible chapters, but also like inside the last chapter of the book, the blueprint for survival, there's this wonderful list of what is called the Magnificent 12, the compassion guarantee for school. And I hope that we'll be able to get some questions around those 12 magnificent. Because they're really essential to transformation within a school. And so we're going to go right now to Maureen Cooper and her chapter in the book, which is self-compassion. Self-compassion for teachers, self-compassion to introduce definitely to students and to hook in the parents so they understand what's going on. Maureen is the founding director of Awareness in Action, and that she is dedicated to the well-being and excellence in the work environment. She's also a frequent instructor with the Charter for Compassion Education Institute. So we welcome her on both accords. Maureen.
Hi, hello everyone. And thank you, Marilyn, very much. And it's wonderful to be here. I was also a school teacher for many years. I taught children between 5 and 18 in inner London for many years, but Margaret Thatcher defeated me and I left formal teaching when she was in her prime and tried to work with compassion from different aspects. I never actually met Maurice in person, unfortunately, but we had a vibrant online friendship, and self-compassion is particularly close to my heart because it was, I met him because he enrolled in my self-compassion online course that I run through my company. And he never had the time to do it. He enrolled for the course and was always so busy, he never had time to do it. So we worked out a way where I could download the whole thing and he could just mull it over in his own time. It was wonderful to write this chapter. I was so happy to contribute to this book. I loved being in the environment of Maurice's energy and passion. And I want to start my short talk here by mentioning the Dalai Lama, who is known as someone who talks about compassion a lot. When he first came to the West, he was overwhelmed by the number of Westerners that spoke to him about how they weren't happy with themselves, how they didn't like themselves, how they wanted to be different from they were. And he thought he was misunderstanding the English. He thought he wasn't hearing them well. And he had to check with his translator. And no, he was assured that in the West, it's not unusual for people to not like themselves very much. And I want to pick this up as we talk about self-compassion, because we know that, I mean, this, and as in the chapter, I go into quite a lot of detail about this, but we know that our stress response has evolved in order to keep us safe. When we feel in danger, our stress response kicks in and helps us move to a safer place. But in the modern world and in modern times, what's happened is that we're reacting to what goes on in our own minds, as if it was a threat from a predator or a lion. We've turned the whole idea of threat in on ourselves, and how it can manifest, as you know, the stress response can manifest as fight, flight, or freeze. But when we're looking at self-compassion, we can see that when we're fighting with ourselves, what tends to happen is we're very critical of ourselves. When we want to run away, we want to shut ourselves away from other people. We want to be alone and nurse our wounds. And if we freeze, then there's a danger we can become completely self-absorbed. No, go back to the other slide, please.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
No,
okay.
yeah, thank you. Thank you, that's it. Because we're caught up in our own thoughts. We're caught up in our own thinking that wants us to hide away. Now, Kristin Neff is a pioneer in self-compassion research. And this diagram represents the three elements of self-compassion that she has identified. The first one is self-kindness. So we try to be as caring towards ourselves as we can be to other people. The second element is recognizing our common humanity. So we recognize that the challenges we face, the pain that we face in our lives is not something personal only to us, but in many ways it's a shared human experience. And when we recognize that, then it gives us a moment of real connection with other people. And the third element is mindfulness, which is being open to the reality of the present moment, and gives us the capacity to acknowledge our suffering without exaggerating it. And there's a lovely story about this little diagram, in that you see it's called Be Kind to Yourself by Kristin Neff. So I wrote to Kristin Neff asking her if I could use this diagram, and she confessed that she didn't know where it came from, but she liked it very much. So I contacted seeyourwords.com, and it seems that they just made this diagram because they were so inspired by her work, and they gave me permission to use it wherever I wanted to use it. So there's a wonderful, compassionate story behind this diagram. Now, the interesting thing is that there's a connection between the way we can turn on ourselves, the fight, flight, freeze, and these three elements of self-compassion. So when we fight, when we turn on ourselves, when we are self-critical, the antidote is self-kindness. That helps us to calm our self-criticism, helps us to re-educate our inner critic, if you like. When we want to isolate ourselves, shut ourselves away from other people, then recognizing our common humanity is an antidote to that. It can help bring us back to this understanding of connecting with others through suffering. And mindfulness is the antidote to the self-absorption, because once we're present in the reality of the present moment, when we're actually here, then it's much more possible to cut through the thoughts that are making us exaggerate what's going on with us, and to close in. So now if I have the other slide, please, Marilyn. So what can we do? And in the chapter in the book, there are several exercises and suggestions, but this is a a very simple one that I thought was good to share here. We can sort of give ourselves, we can allocate ourselves a self-compassion moment. And if you like, you can make this gesture of your heart or not, whatever feels comfortable to you. And then first of all, you acknowledge where I find myself now is stressful and challenging. Then feeling like this some of the time is part of life. There's common humanity. Many people in the world will be going through something similar. And then this last part is so important. I want to be able to give myself the compassion I need right now so I can learn from this situation for the future. Because the whole idea of self-compassion is that we grow through it. It's a growth process. Now, if you try this exercise for yourself, if you work on taking these self-compassion moments, you can do it at any time during your day, completely privately. No one's going to know what's going on in your mind. And feel free to change the language to suit yourself, to suit your own personality and what you feel comfortable with. And at the end of my chapter, I stress, and this is something I feel passionate about actually, is that, is that mindfulness meditation is the basis of self-compassion. It's by understanding how our minds work and making friends with them that we can learn to be compassionate to ourselves. Because actually self-compassion does take courage. On the one hand, I talk to many people who feel that to show compassion for themselves is self-indulgent, is selling out somehow, is letting themselves down. I mean, if I think about my parents and their generation, they would have had no time for self-compassion because you got on with it. You just got on with the job. You did what had to be done, and you got on with it. And for many of us, that's a conditioning that we're overcoming by giving ourselves permission to be self-compassionate. But then on the other hand, you get people who think self-compassion is having a regular massage or eating lots of ice cream. You hear people saying things like, I'm going to show some compassion to myself. I'm not going to go to this meeting. And I mean, that's an exaggeration. It's a caricature. But for me, the self-compassion is about learning to work with the challenging parts of myself, to look at myself as I am, to recognize the parts of myself that I don't think work so well, that I would like to work better, that I would like to heal and grow. And it's a process of growing. So it's a process of development and change. So as you learn to be more comfortable, more accepting, more compassionate to the difficult parts of yourself, it's a wonderful pathway to learning to be more compassionate to the difficult parts of all the people that you come across in your life. So compassion for oneself, if we can find the courage to really go for it on a deep level, is a natural segue into feeling more compassion for others. So that's a summary of my chapter. And again, thank you very much for allowing me to give it and including me today.
Oh, you're most welcome, Maureen. I have a feeling we'll have some questions for you, because when you think about education and its progression in trying to help children, not necessarily teachers, but children to understand themselves well, better, and moving forward, a lot of those programs came and they left us. I mean, there was the magic circle where we would put children in a circle where they would just exchange what was going on in their lives. There was do so with the little puppets, developing an understanding of self and others, which is a precursor to a lot of, you know, what we're trying to bring into schools now. The coming and going of values education and all those wonderful exercises that made their way into schools in the 70s and they were very short-lived. So now when we look at self-compassion and compassion for self and others, we really have to find a way that we make it last, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that as we move forward. Okay, we're back to Rahisha and her chapter in the book, Building Whole School Compassionate Approaches to Mental Health and Well-Being. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think for me, I was asked to kind of write this chapter, but I'm a clinician by background. So as you said before, I'm an occupational therapist by background, and was a little bit like, I don't have a clue about writing anything apart from clinical notes, but I think was very encouraged by the vision, and I've worked in child and adolescent mental health services now for 15 years, and I think the last sort of 8-9 years I've been in early help, and was just like, actually I can see the kind of strategies and some really good practice, but actually the bits where kind of teaching staff are saying, what can we do? And so actually, how brilliant would it be if actually we could put some of these down into the chapter? And so actually sitting down and trying to formulate something that would be helpful. So the chapter for me was trying to look at it as a whole system, so that it was to kind of look at some of the theory about why, when we were looking at mental health, I'm looking at compassion, for anybody that picked it up, it would be for any professional. So it wasn't necessarily just education. It could be if it was for a parent, if it was for a caregiver, if it was for anybody for kind of vital services. There were real practical things that they could do. So the chapter for me, I kind of do talk about adverse childhood experiences. So I'm sure for many people that are listening kind of internationally, it's something that has come up and has been talked about a lot, about the impact of traumas for people during their childhood, when we're looking at things like abuse, neglect, parental mental health, and how this can change the malleability of a young person's brain and their kind of neuro pathways, and in turn can also impact, if they have a greater number of those, there are greater risks of things like poorer mental health, poorer physical health, and greater risk of them engaging in risk behaviours. So I think one of the things for me was kind of trying to look at the background of that and the research into that. And one of the American psychiatrists that I listen to a lot, Dr. Bruce Perry, who is just phenomenal. He's a senior fellow for the Trauma Academy. He talks a lot about how we can have a lot of these external experiences, but actually they can be counterbalanced with positive experiences and connections with positive, trusted adults. And I use that a lot when I'm talking to teaching staff, when I'm talking to other professionals, to say that actually these are young people who are having a really, really difficult time based on things that they've experienced or the behaviours that we're seeing, but actually we can begin to counterbalance, we can build in compassion, we can build in these different support and care moving forward, and you are part of that care plan, you're part of that strategy. And if we look at kind of the neurosequential science behind it, we know that over time that really is supported. So the chapter was looking at how to do things differently in a more trauma-informed way, and a more compassionate, focused way. The idea of it being a whole system is that it isn't just about teachers and a child. So we wouldn't necessarily just say, oh, this is a plan for a young person, but we're saying this is a plan for a young person, but that plan is also with that young person in conjunction. We're sharing that with the family. We are then sharing that with the school, with their teacher, but also with the teacher, we're sharing that with the whole of the school, where it's appropriate. So the whole system around them, it becomes a whole full approach. One of the things that I did come across a lot was around if staff, professionals are burnt out, this actually kind of degrades compassion. And when we're looking at human connection, when we're looking at emotional connection, and we're looking at the senses of rewards, then actually if staff are feeling really, really burnt out, and that links very much with Maureen's chapter, then actually they won't be able to offer what our young people need. And so actually we know that's going to have an impact on mental health and well-being. And so actually in part of my chapter I talk about strategies for all staff, and that does look at teaching whole school mindfulness. It does talk about whole school room for debrief. It does talk about access for staff for having counselling. It talks about one-to-one, and how actually do we, you know, people talk about having an empty cup. How do we fill it back up? Whichever kind of analogy you'd like to use. How do we look after people as a whole? I look at strategies specifically for, and we term them as learners because we use different terminology kind of across the globe. So kind of 0 to 19 we looked at, because even within utero we know that experiences and kind of levels of cortisol and so on can impact. We looked at kind of practical strategies even from that point for 0 to 19 of kind of what to do, self-compassion kits for young people, you know, the idea of sort of having different ways to communicate that weren't necessarily verbal, and how that again is transferred into the home as well as kind of school. So there's a kind of commonality. And then I also looked at strategies for parents and caregivers, because one of the things that I think I find so frequently is that schools are phenomenal in the support that they put in, but sometimes the communication then at home and those strategies then aren't followed through. And so a young person then, in terms of their resilience and in terms of the strategies, that isn't then followed through. And actually from a trauma-informed approach, from a compassionate approach, one of the things is actually how do we look after our parents and caregivers to inform them actually this is what we're doing and why. And some of our families have also had a number of traumas themselves and need support, and so actually how do they access that? How do we build connection and role model compassion if they haven't had that role model themselves? So kind of in conclusion, I think the aim for me is that it is a full system. So it's not just one part of anything. It's making sure that we see as professionals, and very much as a clinician that comes in to offer advice and support, that I see it as a whole, and the same for teaching staff, that they see it as a whole and that they aren't alone in things. So yeah, thank you for listening to me.
Well, I think that there's so much to explore. I was in a conversation last night on a program that was offered through Positive Discipline. And one of the activities that we had to go through was to consider our early upbringing and name who nurtured us and what did they do in that nurturing. And it was incredible that there were so many people who couldn't think that they'd ever been nourished or taken care of in their early years, which is just astounding, because then that insecurity of the person coming in to school at an early age, what does that do? And there's that big blank wall for teachers. how do I get through to that child? So thank you so much. I think we don't think often of the work that you do and how it relates to schools. So thanks.
Thank you.
Now there's Colin. And Colin, I have a feeling that Colin has a bright spot in his eye. He tried to fool us this morning, making us think that he couldn't hear us. So I'm kind of looking forward to his presentation. And I love the chapter because what it does is it brings it down right home. And, you know, compassion in the second city. And having lived in the second city in the United States most of my life, Chicago, I understand the whole concept of second city. And so we're anxious to see about schooling and in the second city of Birmingham. Thanks, Colin.
Marilyn, thank you so much. And thanks, I guess, from all of us from the Compassionate Education crew back in Birmingham, UK, for the invitation to join this event. It feels really important. We are honoured to have the opportunity to read from the book. I'm a bit like Amateur. I mean, I keep my copy close to hand. Yeah, actually, so you're talking about Chicago. Occasionally when we Google Birmingham, we do get Birmingham, Alabama. And I did once send an email to the Alabama schools in error. I didn't get much response, but anyway, these things happen. So Marilyn, what I'm going to do is, for those friends who are here this afternoon, give a little introduction to Birmingham, UK, just set the scene a little bit about our city. You can see it behind me. That's the university campus where I work, with the enormous great clock tower in the middle of it. And behind is the city skyscape, the center of the city itself. Now, we're not as big as Chicago. I just Googled, I got 2.7 million. We're just north of a million these days, heading for 1.25 million. So it's a growing city. So I'll give you describe the city. Then I'll take you through what the chapter is about. If we think back to the pyramid that Amajot shared, it starts with compassion for self at its base. It then moves into compassion for others, and this is where Maureen's work comes in, self to others. That's what Rowie was just talking about. Then it gets into the sort of territory of compassion for community, for place, for society. And ultimately, when we, on a good day, with the wind behind us, when in the education system, we help those young people to become fully self-actualized, fully aware global citizens, they are at the apex of that pyramid, and they have genuine compassion for the planet. If you inverted the pyramid, because a lot of my footprint, Maureen will know what I'm talking about here, because I was in a London Education Authority product back in the day, worked in London, studied at Tavistock Clinic, all about psychodynamics, where of course we start with the person, the baby, who develops outwards by building what we hope are those satisfactory attachments. That's what Rowie was talking about. When you have that loving, nurturing base to build on, if you're lucky enough to get that, you then move into nursery, into school, wider friendship groups, and so forth. What I'm talking about here is that section which is between moving out from your family into education, and how that fits in with a sense of civic values, civic pride. And it links to what Mick was talking about systems leadership, which are informed by compassion. So that's what it's about. So our beautiful city, second city. What do we like about it? Well, one, it's super diverse. We have over 200 nationalities in the city. I always say, if it exists, you will find it somewhere, either in Handsworth or over in Alum Rock at the east of the city. I can guarantee it's there, it exists. So we welcome the world. We are officially a city of sanctuary. And that means a lot in how schools think about their place in the world and involve their children. We are actually the youngest city in Europe. Our demographics are very young, which is great. It means we always need to build more schools and expand our schools. We are heading to be the UK's first global majority city. If you look at the demographics, if you take the 14-year-olds as a slice of life, about a third of them are white British, white Irish, and then the biggest group beyond that are friends from the Indian subcontinent, in particularly from Pakistan, Mirpur province. Then we have about 12-15% Black, Afro-Caribbean, and so forth. So it's interesting because of that. That tells us a lot about our identity and how we need to shape up education. We're a bit cash poor as well. We're the sixth poorest city in England. What that means is that the children we work with have a greater dependency on education than they might in more prosperous environments to get those feet on the ladder, to harvest those aspirations. And how many young people have we got? About 250,000. So it's a good, nice size to work with. Now, my chapter tells an interesting story, I think, about what happens when the leaders of a city neglect or take for granted their civic mission on education. And I'm defining the civic mission here as being driven by compassion, what Morris taught me, that working definition of love in action. So you can't just do it at school level. I believe you need that civic backing. You know, the alternative title for the chapter could have been It Takes a City to Raise a Child. It's not just about little portions of the city. So what happens when things implode is that, because of events that I'll describe briefly, the emotional bank account, which sustains everybody. I love that phrase of Stephen Covey's. I'm a big Stephen Covey fan. The more I reread his main work, it's about a voyage of his own self-discovery. And this concept of the emotional bank account, we all have an emotional bank account. We all need an emotional bank account. And on a good day, it's in credit. And sometimes you just need to draw on it. So the city's emotional educational bank account just got drained completely. And in the process, a lot of social capital that had been created between and amongst and beyond the school's estate was squandered. It was literally thrown away. 23 years ago, and Mick was there. I'm reading about Mick's work here. I think I'm reading about Boris's work, actually. Our inspectors said that Birmingham was a very well-run local education authority. It's now clear that it is much more than that. It's one of a very small number which stand as an example to all others of what can be done, even in the most demanding urban environments. So think Chicago, think New York, think I think parts of our European cities, parts of Paris, the Amsterdams, and so forth. It showed that when everyone really pulls in the same direction with compassionate leadership, you can work miracles together. I was shocked to hear Mrs. Thatcher referred to earlier, because she is our former Prime Minister. And of course, she is notorious for having stated there's no such thing as society. In other words, the neoliberal proposition that it's predicated on a selfish view of society, the absolute opposite of compassion, whereby you're only in it for yourself, you and your family, the rest of the world can go to hell as long as I've got my house, my kids, my caravan, my car, and all the rest of it. So Birmingham was demonstrating to Mrs. Thatcher what can be done when everybody really, really does pull together. Now, I could talk all night about this. For several reasons, things didn't continue as they were. Key people moved on, government's education policy changed, later after that, we hit government austerity, so there's less resources around generally. And in that rather disappointing situation, a few people took advantage. And what they did was actually attempted to turn some of the non-religious schools into a version of very socially conservative Islamic education schools. It was an episode that became known nationally, if not internationally, as Trojan Horse. And it had very negative consequences for Birmingham. And I identify this as what happens when you basically abandon education in the city, because I think that's what the leaders did for a decade. I don't want to dwell on that. I'm more interested in recovery. And the chapter talks about how we began to reconnect vital elements, vital parts of society in Birmingham, which address all of those kind of issues that Mick was talking about. This is much broader than passing exams. This is much broader than weighing and measuring. You know, we use that phrase about, you know, weighing the pig and all of that. We do have an education system currently in England, which is well nigh obsessed with weighing the pig rather than fattening it. So what I'm talking about here in the chapter, and this is quite grounded, and if anyone wants to follow up with email, of course, I'm happy to explain in a bit more depth. The very first thing that I think the city did to reassert its moral authority in education was put out a curriculum statement, quite simple, 2 sides of A4. It asserted every child's right to study the full breadth of curriculum, so in a balanced way between the music, between the maths and English, yes, we know that they have to be there, but also the arts, the sciences, the humanities, the sport and so forth. In other words, all 200,000 plus Birmingham children have a right to that full curriculum, because some people have been attempting to narrow it, take away in particular arts, music, humanities and so forth. We then hitched our wagon to the Unicef Rights Respecting Schools Award. There are now over 200 schools in the city, that's out of about 450, who are actively engaged with the Rights Respecting Schools Award. And we did this because in 2015, a duty was introduced, partly as a result of Trojan Horse, whereby all public institutions had to comply with something called the prevent duty, which was essentially a negative way of policing society to eliminate extremism. And of course, it just went down like a lead balloon in Birmingham. It was very unpopular indeed. So we thought we need to work with something that has universal values, that talks in humanist language, that is about children's rights, children's empowerment, children's self-actualization, children looking out for each other, and ultimately looking out globally. So we are the largest outpost of UNICEF working to accredited schools, well, in England. We're very proud of that. We have an annual celebration every year at the Rep Theatre in the centre of Birmingham, where schools come together, pandemic notwithstanding, to show their work. A few more things that we've done, because I'm aware of time here. We pulled together from one of our schools some work on LGBTQ plus education, identity, learning in schools. It's called No Outsiders. You can look it up. You can buy the books, because again, a feature of Trojan Horse had been the absolute marginalization of LGBTQ. Oh, get the initials right. It was considered unacceptable to talk about these things in some schools. That it was rather nasty. Pleased to say that now in our education system, we do have nationally a requirement to teach this in primary schools and secondary schools. So we got ahead of the curve on that. One more thing I'll mention, there's other bits in the chapter, and I get quite emotional talking about this. The music service. Now, the music service has been a a constant here. It became an independent body back in about 2011, 2012. So it's a charity company. Now, the music service is one of the few organizations that brings together children together from the whole city, from south to north, from east to west, no matter what community you are from. It makes sure that children, no matter what their economic circumstances, will have an opportunity to participate in choirs and learn musical instruments. And I was very lucky as a boy in Liverpool to have piano lessons. And I want every kid to have that same opportunity I was lucky enough to have. So they make sure that it's not just privileged children from affluent homes that get access to music. Everyone gets access to it. And then once a year, again, pandemic notwithstanding, the children from the city gather together, thousands of them, to sing in choir and to play, whether it's steel pans, whether it's bhangra, whether it's classical, special schools are involved. It is a glorious celebration of the community's youth, and they all see each other. Often they won't, because they're in segmented kind of slightly separate communities across the city. These things are so important and stuff that you just don't read about in education policy. So what are we really about here? What is it that the city can offer when it gets its act together? It's about developing character education, resilience, self-awareness, well-being. It's about fostering arts and sports. Above all, I think it's about a sense of belonging. Let's go back to the pyramid. So you start, hopefully, in a good situation at home. You build those attachment bonds. You move out into beyond your family, into community, into education. We want you to, at a certain point, to feel that you absolutely know who you are. Thank you for that. Where you are, because that is the best launching pad to become a young warrior to preserve our planet, which we are currently destroying at a rate of knots. And so I think that the more, the whole motor drive of this beautiful book is designed ultimately to get to the gold tip there at the top, so that the new generation are empowered to take action. I remember, this is my final little anecdote. We were at a board meeting. Mick was there, a few of the others were there, and we had a discussion about, was it good or not for young people to take strike action on a Friday afternoon, the Greta model, and show the community they cared about this beautiful planet. And I think it's fair to say that Maurice and I, we were definitely on the side of mobilizing the students, getting them out on the streets. Now, Mick might come back later and say, you bloody irresponsible you are, Colin. I know. Certainly one of our number felt that was not the way to do things. For me, compassionate education ultimately has to lead to action, organization to save the planet. I've said enough. Thank you.
You've left me speechless. I think that we need to take your chapter in the book and to, because it's really about creating a compassionate city that embraces education. And that if you don't have that compassionate city, your education system is just going to be flawed. And I love some of the things that you've written in there, because they really support a lot of what the charter is all about. Because many of you know that, we have over 450 compassionate cities, but I think that you've given us in this education book, the foundation for really having a city consider some deep issues. And I know that in the United States right now, there's a lot of movement in cities to take away money from law enforcement and to give it to occupational therapists, to give it to social workers who would come on call, to give it to education and work programs. So I think that you've done a beautiful job, Colin, and thank you so much for your contribution. So now's the time to open it up for conversation amongst ourselves. And certainly if anyone who is here and would like to join us in conversation, we'd love for that to happen. One of the things that, it's just a general question that I think so many of us are faced with. What have we learned about education during this pandemic?
I'll start the ball rolling there, Marilyn. I think I've been working a lot with head teachers in the city in Birmingham from the university base. We've had them together in big numbers for seminars. We've had head teachers leading seminars. What I've taken away is the re-emergence of the importance of community and place. I mean, we've had head teachers literally going from door to door in some communities, doing safe and well checks on families, particularly those where the parents and grandparents, you'll often have three or four generations in a house, don't have good or any written English. So the kids are the translators, as you know, just checking, are you okay? Have you got food? Have you got medicine? Are you worried about going to the doctor? And yeah, we'll literally delivering learning materials to the door as well, because often these households won't have connectivity, won't have broadband and so forth. And what head's telling me is this is kind of, it's a bit like, it's going back a bit, because all of our schools used to be all community schools at one time, and that was sort of dropped off the edge. Our current government has a very narrow definition of what education is about. But actually the head teachers, and there's 23,000 of them in England, we're out there working with the community, and I hope some of that will stick, because it broadened out the relationships from see you on parents' night 3 times a year to talk about your kids' SATs results or their prospects at GCSE, and yeah, we need to do that. But education is much broader than that. So re-emergence of community and place for me.
That is wonderful. I know when I was a principal in Chicago, our school had 47 zip codes. And it's just impossible to ask parents to come to you after a long day of work. And so as a whole staff, we just decided that we would go into the community, like you were saying, and how much that changed the whole school because of doing that. So thank you for that. Mike, I don't know if you were going to, I saw you turned on your screen, so maybe that you were ready to join in.
Yeah, I turned off the screen because I was worried about internet, but I think one of the things we've learned over the course of the pandemic is to be a little bit kinder to each other about the way in which we look at the roles we play. So I'm hoping that some of the silly arguments that appear in society about who's most valuable and who's most worthwhile start to get balanced again. I think we've all appreciated medical people, and as Colin just said, I think schools people and education people have been valued in many communities. But I think we've started to realise that in England we had this notion of people who did key jobs, key workers, and key workers were nurses and teachers and people like that, but there were also power station workers and lorry drivers and people who emptied trash bins and people who did jobs that perhaps some people don't want to look at, and often very low paid jobs. And I think we started to respect each other in society much more strongly than perhaps we have over the last generation. So I'm just hoping that lasts when we do start to recover and get out of this and start to get back to a different sort of life, not go back to where we were, but a different sort of life going forward. I think we've learned a lot that we haven't realised yet.
Yeah. Maureen, were you going to say something? I see you took your mic off.
No, I'm a little bit hesitant to say because I'm not working directly in education at the moment. So I'm just from an observational point of view. And I'm also in the Netherlands, where the education system is different. And I mean, it's obvious I'm a Brit by nationality, and I just watch the present government with fear and trembling. And my hope is that it doesn't last too long, and the good things that are happening can grow and blossom. And you know, organizations like this one will bear fruit in spite of no help from places that could help a great deal more.
Yeah.
I'd better not say any more.
No, that's perfectly fine. You know, one of the things I believe that we hear across the world is that we're almost down to two different groups of students. Those who have really thrived through this time period, they like the ability to take on responsibility for their education. They love what they're doing on the internet. There doesn't seem to be any, you know, barriers for them to seek their own education. And then we have those children who just don't know what to do and have really maybe in some cases dropped off the radar. So that, you know, we have, when you think about it now, it's well over a year that many places, like right where I live, it's been since March of last year that students are just now going to school, maybe a day or two a week. So we have a lot to make up for, and there's this whole thing of creativity right now that's in front of us. How can we reinvent education to meet the needs of the youth? And I remember when we started this, I said that in our magical book here, that there's the compassion guarantee, the magnificent 12. And I just want to read a couple of them, and I think that they might spark a little bit of interest and conversation. It says that the school, its governors, managers, parents, and career and carers guarantee that, one, we adhere to the golden rule, which is basically the Charter for Compassion. That's what we are, is the golden rule. And that we treat everybody, including the planet, as we wish to be treated. And the second one is that we do our very best to ensure that this golden thread, the golden rule, of love in action runs through everything that we do in school and beyond. And we teach about compassion and teach compassionately. So those are the first three. So what do we teach about compassion? I'm wondering. That's just being offered as a question. How do you teach compassion?
I think one of the basic things is to enable people to understand that you know, we have this concept that compassion is doing things for others, but in actual fact, you know, if as we learn to become more compassionate ourselves, if we can, it helps us tremendously. It's a win-win situation for everyone. Compassion isn't a top-down activity that, you know, I give it to you because I'm so good at it. Not at all. It's that if I can learn to see you as being just like me, it does me a whole load of good. And I think there are ways of talking to children about that they can really relate to. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Center for Healthy Minds kindness curriculum, where they have some wonderful exercises for children to do just that. to understand the benefit of compassion for the giver and the receiver.
Any more?
I think that's very true. And I also think that if you're in a school setting where only some learning takes place everywhere, and schools just bring a little bit of structure to it. I think compassion, along with other things we teach, are built up in children through teaching, but in other ways in which the school operates. So as somewhere in the book, it talks about children being taught. Some learning is taught, some is caught, and some is cultivated. And the most powerful side of compassion is cultivated. You just grow it because people are demonstrating why it matters and why it counts. And I think there is something about making it explicit to youngsters who are living a sort of helter-skelter life, enjoying everything that comes at them, just to pause and say, do you realise why that made a difference? And do you realise the impact you made? And do you realise the way you felt about things? And we need to realise how important cultivating and learning being caught is compared with the traditional models of being taught, and this notion of teachers as deliverers, as though they're taking around the milk in the morning or the mail to people's houses. You know, what you teach children is the only things that matter are those things that stick. The only things that matter are those things that go into them and stay there. So we've just got to help that to be absorbed and be thought through by the way they live and the way they're encouraged to interact with the world that we hope they're going to influence for the better.
One of the fourth of the Magic 12 is we will do our best to model compassionate behavior at all times with everybody and ensure that there is always one adult in whom you can confide. I think that's a wonderful statement, because compassion is all about modeling as well as doing. And in these magnificent 12, there's a lot of doing that is outlined for us. I just wanted to, because we're getting down to the end of the wire, so to speak, so wanted to thank you all for your participation, and to just do a little like sharing, so that we might have an opportunity to have you all more involved in what we're doing at the Charter. And certainly that one is the invitation of joining us in a continued conversation about education. The other thing is that we have a Charter for Compassionate Schools. And when you have an opportunity, if you go to our website and under programs, education, you'll see the Charter for Compassionate Schools. It's just 3 points. And it's a hope that schools around the world, and we have probably close to 4,000 schools that have signed this charter. And so if you could take a look at it and become a part of it. And one of the things we want to do is to really offer some programming for teachers and also for students. I want to share our next Golden Read with you. This is going to be the first time that we will have a bilingual Golden Read. So when you come into the Golden Read, you'll just select the language, English or Spanish. Una era para la conciencia is again a book by a number of different people, Nobel Prize winning individuals. We have conversation, The Era of Consciousness, with Leonardo Wolff. Some people might know him as the leading theologian on liberation theology. And then Bernardo Klingsberg, who is from Argentina. Leonardo is from Brazil. And Bernardo is very much a philosopher, and he has been working with the United Nations. It will be hosted by Cristina Gonzalez, from Encuentro Mundial de Valores, which is a human values conference that happens each year, and we'll be inviting you to attend that conference online. And Christina is also the chair of the Charter Board of Trustees. And then we mentioned a couple times today that our global reads are part of the Compassion Education Institute, and we run 2 courses or so a month, but we also have a lot of webinars, so and a newsletter that outlines what's happening, that goes out once a week. But our next course, it has been taught before, is very popular, Growing Whole, Not Old, with a brand new subtitle, Aging in the Pandemic Age. So thank you all for your contributions, for the authors who joined us today. We are most grateful, and we look forward to additional working with you. So thank you again, and we'll see you the next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Goodbye.